Um, well,
may I introduce you, Chérif?
please.
Yes, sure. I would like for all of you to meet Chérif Ezzeldin today. He's an actor and a trainer and a business coach. He's centered in Paris. He teaches cultural diversity at the IESEG University in Paris.
Yes,
And he
yes.
had a lifetime of being immersed in the subject of the voice and the journalist. So he's going to talk to us today about the voice. It's all yours, Chérif.
Right. Thank you, Cindy. I mean, as you said, I'm half French, half Egyptian, and I do teach cultural diversity at the DSEG University, amongst other things. And one of the reasons that I was asked to join the team of teachers teaching cultural diversity was because I was Franco-Egyptian who'd lived in England for a very long time. But in fact, I realized that the real reason I'm intercultural is not because of that, but because of my acting training, in the sense that when you're an actor, you go from one world to another, you go from one text to another, you go from one style to another, you go from the stage to a microphone, from a microphone, then you go into front of a camera, and you're constantly adapting, having to go into different worlds, into different logics, different characters. And one of the things, if I may, I'm going to share my screen because I'd like to show you something. One of the things that came to mind is when I went to university, I broached for the first time, I went to the French school, and when I went to university, I studied drama, and that was the first time I actually was in contact with somebody called Shakespeare. And so I had to learn a lot of things because it was new language for me. I was used to Molière, I was used to Racine, French classics. And one of my flatmates was reading English literature. We had this discussion about, I don't know, it was King Lear, and saying, what a wonderful work it was, etc. And then he said, no, King Lear is a flawed masterpiece. And I said, why is it a flawed masterpiece? Well, because, and then he went on for the technicalities, because the scene doesn't quite correspond to the structure of, and from my point of view, I couldn't understand what he was saying, because from the drama point of view, the work is only half the work. The text is only half the work. The other half of the masterpiece is in production. So you've got 50% and 50%, and you never see the whole work as it should be until you've seen it in production. And then, of course, it dies as it's being performed. And so I started to sort of delve into Shakespeare a little bit more, and then I understood why it's become such a Bible for actors, for people who study literature. And one of the things is that, I don't know if you've performed any part in any role in Shakespeare, but there are no stage direction. I think there is only one, and it's in the Winter's Tale, and it says, exit chased by a bear, and that's it. Apart from that, if you want any direction, if you want to know how to decorate, if you want to know how to dress the actors, and if you want to perform, if you want to play one of the parts, the only clues that you have are the texts. That's all. It's a dialogue. It's the exchanges. Everything is in there. You have to listen to the music. You have to understand the flow of the words, the mood of the character, just from the vocabulary. And what occurred to me then is the and was consolidated later on, is that the form is the content and the content is the form. You can't, the two are completely tied in and inseparable. And that's one of the reasons it's, sort of a Bible and a reference. So there's this idea of, semantics and acoustics. You've got the written word, which is one thing, but then you've got to give it life. And then it's, how do you give it life? How do you give it meaning? Well, it's through speaking it, talking it, listening to it. So it's that aspect of the spoken word. What does the spoken word actually transmit? What does it communicate beyond just the word, beyond the verbal? And it's all very coded. And how do we respond to it? And what effect does it have on us? Now, one of I'm going to digress a little bit because it's just introduced the questioning around voice and the values. How do we communicate our values by the way we speak? Another point was that very early on when I was acting, I got to do some TV. And I think that was probably the worst choice I ever made. I accepted a role, I was really happy. And the role was, your name is Chérif Ezzeldin. Yes, Ezzeldin. That's Egyptian, isn't it? That's Arabic, isn't it? I said, that's Egyptian. And I said, oh, would you like to play a terrorist? I said, sure. And then after that, I mean, if you've been on a TV set, it's work, it's like going to the factory. It's 9-hour days, 10-hour days, 6 days a week. And you feel the pressure of money. You don't, bother about pretty things. And so I did one role and then I got another role, and I got the second role because people knew I could do it because they'd seen me doing it. And then you get into this trap of typecasting. And after a while, I just thought, I don't want to continue with this. I don't want to contribute to this image. But it's, why am I doing this? This is not why I wanted to do drama. So step back. And the reason I'm talking about this, it's really still, again, about the value of not just the image, but also the value of the way we speak, what we contribute to, and how we influence each other, not just on a personal level, but as a group, together, as a society. Does the way we speak actually change things? Does it change the course of history? How does it work? And just to show you just an image, okay, so we've got a bird, we've got a fish, and we've got a butterfly. But if you see them singly, that's all it is. But here it's a starling. And then you've got the flight of the starling, which is absolutely fascinating when you see them, flying together. How do they do it? What is the purpose of this formation? What makes them go? There is obviously an order to this, there is some method to this madness. Similarly with the sardine, you've got one sardine which is okay on its own, but as a group, there's another kind of action going on. And similarly with the monarch butterfly as well, which sort of migrate up and down the North America and Central America, I believe. So what does this mean? So there's this kind of working. Is it the survival strategy? Is it group culture? Is it just, in fact, communication, or is it something else? So those are sort of big questions which I was thinking about and trying to relate. And putting it back into perspective, I mean, most of you probably know Beyond Culture by Edward Hall. And this is a quote which I came across, which was exactly, I mean, he sort of formulated exactly the question. You know, if I just read it out, we Westerners find ourselves deeply preoccupied with specifics to the exclusion of everything else. Now, the questions that must be answered are, where do we go for the overview? Who's putting things together? Who are the experts in the high context integrative systems? Who knows how to make the type of observations necessary to build integrative systems of thought that will tell us where we stand? And then there's somebody else that you might know who's called Richard Nisbet. And he wrote a book called The Geography of Thought, and or how Asians and Westerners think differently and why. And he sort of explains, and it all starts with a chance remark from one of his students. And what he goes on to explore is this observation from his student, who says the Chinese believe in constant change. But with things always moving back to some prior state, they pay attention to a wide range. So basically, for the Chinese, is the explanation, you can't understand the specific unless you look at the whole of the big picture. And for Westerners, it's looking, you know, thinking that you can control the big picture just because you know how the individuality operates. Now, this is an illustration which of the story of the farmer and his horse. You have this an old Chinese story. It's a farmer who has a horse, his only sort of worldly possession. And one day the horse runs away. And so the neighbors say, oh my God, commiserations. And that's really bad luck. And the farmer says, good luck, bad luck, who knows? Anyway, life goes on. 2 days later, the horse comes back with some wild horses. Suddenly, he's got millions of horses. And the neighbors, some come and say, oh, good luck, good luck. He says, who knows? Good luck, bad luck. A few days later, his son, his only son, tries to tame one of the horses. And whilst he's taming one of the wild horses, falls off this horse, breaks a leg. So he can't help on the farm. And the neighbors commiserate and so on. And so the farmer goes back to his old wisdom and says, well, good luck, bad luck, who knows, time will tell. Anyway, as it happens, he's, you know, there's a recruiter, sergeant a recruiting officer who comes looking for soldiers to fight the new emperor's war. And of course, the son is not taken up because he's not fit to fight. So good luck or bad luck. And the story can go on and on and on indefinitely. But this is really just to illustrate the different types of approaches. How do we look at things? So what I'd like to sort of put to you, and I'm really, really interested in really discovering, is your thoughts on how the way that we speak influences how we collectively behave, and what does it say about our collective choices and the directions we're moving into. So I've got two example speeches. Of course, everything is centered around British English. I'm sorry, but that's what I know best. So those are the examples, but hopefully we could sort of take a step back from that and sort of open it out and see how that that approach can be applied to other languages. So the first one is the Princess Elizabeth Windsor, she's a princess at the time, making a dedication speech from South Africa on the 27th of April, 1947. So we'll watch that and then we'll compare it with another extract from another royal later on, and we can compare the way they speak. So here we go.
Her Royal Highness Princess Elizabeth, speaking from South Africa on her 21st birthday, marks the occasion with this simple but historic message.
Let me begin by saying thank you to all the thousands of kind people who have sent me messages of goodwill. This is a happy day for me, but it is also one that brings serious thoughts, thoughts of life looming ahead with all its challenges and with all its opportunity. Will you, the youth of the British family of nations, let me speak on my birthday as your representative. Now that we are coming to manhood and womanhood, it is surely a great joy to us all to think that we shall be able to take some of the burden off the shoulders of our elders, who have fought and worked and suffered to protect our childhood. If we all go forward together with an unwavering faith, a high courage and a quiet heart, we shall be able to make of this ancient Commonwealth, which we all love so dearly, an even grander thing, more free, more prosperous, more happy, and a more powerful influence for good in the world than it has been in the greatest days of our forefathers. To accomplish that, we must give nothing less than the whole of ourselves. There is a motto which has been borne by many of my ancestors, a noble motto, I serve. Those words were an inspiration to many bygone heirs to the throne when they made their knightly dedication as they came to manhood. I cannot quite do as they did, but through the inventions of science, I can do what was not possible for any of them. I can make my solemn act of dedication with the whole empire listening. I should like to make that dedication now. It is very simple. I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong. But I shall not have strength to carry out this resolution alone, unless you join in it with me, as I now invite you to do. I know that your support will be unfailingly given. God help me to make good my vow, and God bless all of you who are willing to share in it.
So that's, I mean, you've all seen this about 100 times, but it's very interesting, I think, to look at in detail. We'll jump cut now to 70 years later to May 2016. And we're going to listen to Prince Henry Windsor, giving the closing speech to the ceremony of the closing of the Invictus Games in Orlando. Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Prince Harry.
Good evening, everybody. And everybody at home as well. Wow, what a ride the last 4 days has been. I said you would be moved, inspired, and entertained. Was I right? As the great Stevie Wonder says, teamwork makes the dream work. 4 days, 10 sports, 13 support dogs, 14 nations, 149 events, 410 medals, 485 competitors, 836 volunteers. 1,008 friends and family. And hundreds of hours of grueling competition, and more smiles, tears, hugs and cheers than you could ever count. I'd like to begin by thanking Ken Fisher for taking up the challenge of hosting the Games here in the US. And also to thank his team, led by Vicky Gosling, for delivering a simply remarkable event. We are all so grateful for all that you've done. Thank you. I've been hugely honored to hand out gold, silver, and bronze medals over the course of this competition. But what meant the most to me was handing out your Invictus Foundation medallions this evening. Those medallions are the real prizes for the years of intense rehabilitation you've put yourselves through to be here. The competition has been fierce, with performances of the highest international standard across a number of events. But what inspired me was the courage to make it to the starting line, to take to the field or to dive in that pool, motivated by the goal of giving your all, medal or no medal. You showed your families, your friends, and yourselves just how far you've come regardless of the result. I know by your nature you all want to win, but these games are so much more than that. Invictus is so much more than that. What could explain the remarkable sportsmanship of Mark Urquhart in sacrificing gold on the track to push Stephen Simmons into first place? Invictus. How else could I describe the way I felt seeing Tim Payne, a man I met 3 years ago to the day, in his hospital bed at Walter Reed, beaming as he wore his gold medal around his neck? Invictus. What defines the spirit of Denmark's Johan Andersen, who loaded the coffin of his friend onto the flight which changed my life in 2008, and then fought through his own dark days to compete in London and Orlando? Invictus.
So I'm stopping here because it goes on for a bit longer, but there's not much change. He just runs through a series of names and instances and examples, personal examples. So, I mean, what is possibly interesting here is, so just going on to the next one, is really, first of all, the two mottos which are placated in both these extracts. You've got from 1947, I serve. And you got 2016, I am, which comes from, I don't know if you know the poem, but it's from the Invictus. It says, I am the master of my own fate. And I mean, does anybody, is somebody not familiar with the references to Invictus? It's been, no? It's a poem by somebody called William Ernest Henley. And it's the last, it builds up to the last two lines. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Just very briefly, he's a poet. He was born in Gloucester in 1849, died in 1903. He was a poet, critic, and publisher, very briefly. And he was, in fact, diagnosed at the age of 12 with tubercular arthritis. And he had to have, eventually, I mean, he was in great suffering, and he had his leg was amputated, and he had to have another foot operation. So basically, he was in great suffering all his life. But he was a huge personality, overcame all his pain and his difficulties. And while he was sort of in a recovery home, he wrote this poem, which is about how you survive personal pain, and that you decide you are your own fate. You depend on nobody. It's you pull yourself up by your own strength. He also inspired the character of Long John Silver in Treasure Island. Anyway, there are lots of other things we could say about him, but it's very significant that this particular poem, this particular quote, was used as the fundamental message of the Invictus Games, and also as a personal commitment on behalf of Prince Harry, because he seems to say a lot more. Now, what I was going to suggest is to just from the point of view of just the voice, the way the words are pronounced, what they say, so that from a vocalics point of view, is to try and identify elements of the pronunciation that can indicate, that support perhaps underlying values. Now, Cindy, I think you had suggested that might be interesting for people to either take a photograph, screenshot of these aspects. For example, pitch, volume, the speed, the rate, the rhythm, the quality of the voice, and maybe verbal filters as well, to identify those different parts of the voice and try to match them with underlying beliefs behind that. And there's another element which could pronunciation, which could be interesting. It's really how the vowels are pronounced. Are they long? Are they short? Are they flattened? Now, of course, here with those two speeches, it's really for people who've been very much attuned, perhaps, to British English. But even if you're not very much attuned, I'm sure you can hear the very big difference between the pronunciation of Princess Elizabeth and Prince Harry. The consonants, the stress, the connected speech, and the intonation. I mean, are any of you familiar with these? Yes, familiar or unfamiliar, I should ask, with these elements? Yes, George, I saw you putting a hand up.
I'm putting my hand up as well.
Oh, you are familiar. You're familiar.
Yes.
Okay, fine. So, so what that would be interesting, it's really to have your cut. This is really the highlight for me. Is really to have your cut on how you speak and how people who speak your own tongue speak themselves. And if you've noticed over the years, perhaps what you could call vocal trends. Have the vocal trends changed? And how do you understand them? How do you interpret those changes? What does it say about perhaps the way we're going, or the way the society you're in is going, and the choices they make? So what I suggested was that we could break up into, we're going to go into breakout rooms, or I don't know how many we are, or maybe just have an exchange here. What do you think?
I think we could have an exchange here.
Wonderful.
That might work too. Yeah.
Now I'll just stop sharing, and then well, what have you in fact, what have you noticed perhaps first between the I mean, that's the big differences apart from the models. Just from a
George has
vocal
his
point
hand
of view.
George has had his hand up.
Sure.
Now, I wasn't going to address that specifically, but I can tell the difference between old recordings and new recordings, even in my own family. But what I wanted to mention was I grew up in what was called the melting pot of the United States, which meant that you could walk 3 blocks in any direction and hear people speaking a different language. When I was about 24 years old, I took 100 lessons in Berlitz School in learning Russian, which unfortunately sort of disappeared because I was neither a spy nor a military guy. But when I was studying Russian, the prof was amazed that I could pronounce all kinds of things that most people had difficulties with. And I realized finally that it was as 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, we visited these neighborhoods and we made fun of the people's accents, but we gained the capacity of speaking their vowels and their consonants in a way that was incredible. And so, you know, I can imitate about 8 different accents and almost pass in those accents. But what I notice is that each one has its own sense. I can sit here watching a German language thing on television or a video, and the telephone rings and I pick it up and I say, "Hallo, Herr Simons am Apparat." "Oh, pardonnez-moi, je suis Monsieur Simons, je suis chez moi." And so, you know, what interests me is the flexibility, and you as an actor must have had lots of experiences with the flexibility. So it's not a matter of just developing in time, but it's to me, I feel like I'm an interculturalist because that's one of the experiences that led me that way.
Right. Cindy, yes.
I'd like to ask a question of all of you, if you don't mind. Of these 2 examples that we had, does one of these ways of speaking seem more credible, or I don't even know how to say this properly. Does one sound more intelligent than the other? Or more believable than the other? Or maybe that's not a fair question.
I think it's very fair. I think it depends to who's here.
Vincent had his hand up, and then Bernd has his hand up.
Yeah,
Vincent?
yeah, indeed.
Uh-oh, we don't hear you.
Microphone.
Beginner's fault. I should know better. I was watching the video that was comparing, obviously, those 2 royal family people. You know, I'm a Republican, but that's on the side. The one was very static, Princess Elizabeth reading a paper, and the other context, Harry, was very dynamic. Okay, so I was wondering what the influence of that, not so much about the speech production, but how does the context influence? As an actor, I'm sure you also have that. We all have our meanings about that, I think. And whether you're just reading a paper very statically, or you dynamically improvising. Harry was improvising. Well, it looked like it was improvisation. It was not, but it looked very dynamic, very natural. Whereas Elizabeth was very static, reading a paper. So I was wondering, it was their own language, but if you do that in a foreign language, on top of that, how does this influence and the setting to the speech production? That was what I was interesting to discuss.
Bernd has his hand up then.
Yeah, it was a bit similar to what Vincent just said, but I also realized in the first extract, how shall I describe it? It was much more nasal, much more top down, or maybe that's how I felt it. Also the prosody, the intonation was kind of very, very fluid, but from the top to the bottom. And with Prince Harry's speech, it was almost unrecognizably similar to, so the first one was very royal, and the second one was unrecognizably similar to any kind of TV presenter, so any kind of stage show.
Yeah. Alice?
Absolutely.
Alice also had her hand up. Yeah.
Thank you. One thing that really struck me was how perfectly both of them know their context, and they know their audience, and they know their role. And basically, I wouldn't have expected anything different from Princess Elizabeth in that day and age, and Prince Harry in 2016 for who they are and when they were and who they were speaking to in what role. So he was definitely, I don't know if he could speak like her or the modern equivalent of that kind of formal speech. I don't know if he ever has, or if he's just always brought the same personality and the same voice to the various functions that he had to fulfill as a working royal. But that's less to do with the details of their phonetics or phonology, which other people cover in much more detail and better than I do.
There was powerful colonialism in both their voices. Totally different, but they own the world.
Oh, that's, can you expand on that?
Well, I mean, basically, it is the awareness of somehow being in charge of everything, sort of. I don't know how to put it.
The authority, the command?
Sorry? Say
the
that again.
authority, the command?
Yeah, it was the I'm in charge sense that I found in both of them. Although they're very different in their styles, but they were both I'm in charge. There was no hesitation.
Peter also had his hand up as well.
Who's Peter?
Yeah, for a Brit listening to those two recordings, what is very striking is that the way in which the princess spoke was typical of that era. It was typical probably of her class, and nobody could speak like that anymore today. Prince Charles, King Charles III will not speak with that, what is known as conservative received pronunciation, conservative RP anymore. They would be laughed out of court, literally. And it was interesting to listen to what actually made that so conservative, apart from the style. I'll come back to the style in a moment, but the sounds, the vowels. I mean, what was striking was the difference in the pronunciation of off, whereas Princess said orf. Orf as a vowel sound for off, in the word off, was laughed at when I was a young man in my 20s. Yeah, this was no longer possible to talk like that. It was because, of course, so much of English pronunciation, British pronunciation, is marked by class. Great Britain is a society not only divided by Brexit in latter years, but divided by class, and still is. And that's something that Harry, of course, couldn't possibly do. Harry has moved into the way he's speaking is a much more modern form of RP. Yeah, it will still not be. It's not a regional accent, but a modern received pronunciation, which is still marked for education and class, but not so excessively as Princess Elizabeth was. What we're finding more and more in Great Britain is that how he was speaking was how indeed people in television shows will tend to talk like that. Yeah, that's the way that they can win over as many people as possible without going down the road of, okay, I'm going to be very regional in my pronunciation, which of course, interestingly, the BBC in the last 20, 30 years, which was always a kind of a model for received pronunciation, has become much, much more regional and much more inclusive in that way. Yeah, that the media began to realize that to address this to address the audience, you need to include them by using all kinds of voices and accents, and that's the case on when I listen to the BBC here in Germany in these days and compare it with what I heard 40 years ago, this was absolutely impossible. You have a broad Scottish accent, a broad Irish accent, a broad Yorkshire accent of the journalists on the BBC. This would have been unthinkable. There's been a great equalization in that, or an attempt at least to equalize. Getting back to what Harry was, the difference between Harry and his grandmother, was that Harry, of course, was in an informal situation, much more what Vincent called dynamic. And this meant that he was able to be a lot more emotional. And so things that you mentioned, Chérif, of the paralinguistic features like speed, volume, intonation, all these things which convey emotion. Yeah, these were things that were very obviously different from his grandmother's, but was made possible by the very much more informal situation that he was in. She was reading from a text, as you said, Vincent, and was very much more formal and had a role to play.
Vincent was asking, is this what's called the Queen's English?
Well, that would have been the Queen's English, yes. The King's English doesn't. The King's English, I'm sure, doesn't stand a chance. So I'll finish my lecture there now. I'm sorry I've monopolized the conversation, but that was my take on it. Yeah.
That was great. Thanks, Peter. But there is something. If I can just come back on that last point, I thought it was very interesting to see the format of the dedication speech in 1947. And seeing that the accepted format today of the Invictus Games, and it could have been, in fact, he could have done his closing speech in a more formal way, but that was not the collective choice. That was not the way that the producers, that the whole show was organized. It was not how imagine how the public would receive it. So there's a kind of tacit acceptance, which is just not one way. It's not just the individual who has decided that's the way to present and that's the way to do it. It's a collective signaling, in fact, which builds up and which leads to that particular result. What is interesting between those two examples is that they are both almost very pure in their intentions. And there is no divergence between what is intended and what is given. And it's like a motorway. And what is interesting is just seeing how the form serves the content and how well the pronunciation or the paraverbal messaging is aligned with that particular intention in both. I mean, there's lots of things. I mean, like George, you mentioned just the acoustic quality of the recording, which dates, and this is true. Even whether it's in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s, even 80s and 90s films, you can tell just by the acoustics that it's the time is different. The sound is different. So the sound itself, the quality of the sound is informing you on what is right, what is wrong, where we're at, where we stand. 1947, the presence of a camera, the presence of a microphone is not the same, doesn't have the same significance as it does today. The presence of a microphone today is superfluous because they're tiny instruments. You don't need to see them. The presence of a microphone in 1947 requires 50 people. It requires tons of machines. It's a special occasion. So you've got this formality, you've got this other way of presenting yourself. You can hear, I mean, you can hear that with the, I mean, I remember about people talking about themselves and listening to recordings, and one of them was of Marilyn Monroe talking to her psychiatrist, the quality of the acoustics, just of the recording, when it was played to somebody who didn't know who it was, who didn't recognize her voice, said immediately, you know, this is very old, and it's a strange way of talking.
May I ask you a question?
Yes.
Chérif, I want to ask your opinion about this. So does that mean that if I'm talking to an audience that's much different than me, let's say I'm talking to a young audience, and I should take on their verbiage and their intonation,
No.
or do I keep true to me?
No, I wouldn't, and that wasn't, no, that's not at all what I meant. It's not that you should mirror, it's that it comes with a message. Now, the thing that's interesting also in the situation with Harry on stage is that he's got a microphone, but he's projecting his voice. So with a microphone, you can speak very gently. Everybody in the room can hear you. And you can just speak very quietly, very softly. You can learn to do that. But he doesn't do that. He projects his voice. What's the message? The message is, I am relating to my physical space, and I'm relating to the physical, I'm relating to the physical presence of those around me. And even right at the beginning, he says, hello, everybody, which when I first heard it, I was shocked by the way he pronounced everybody. It sounds strange when you know he's a royal. But so everybody, and then there's a pause, and then and everybody else at home. He's not playing to the camera, he's playing to the people. That's another signaling. He's much more into the here and now and the space, the people, the relational, and it legitimizes the whole discourse, which is on an emotional level. The pronunciation, which is very loose, which is seems very uncontrolled in comparison to Elizabeth, who's got these very tight vowel sounds, very closed. What does it indicate? Well, it just indicates control. I'm in total control of my emotions. I have them. They come up occasionally, but I can always keep them in control. And that is in accordance with the set of beliefs of what being a monarch is, what being a king is. You have to serve, you have to control your own private passions in order to fulfill your role. In the situation of the Invictus Games, the value system is totally inversed. I mean, you've got, I mean, you mentioned, Peter, I mean, it's all about class system, but RP is about the lower classes who want to get ahead in the world, get more power and so on, have to emulate the upper classes.
Chérif, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have three hands up, so whenever you're finished your thought.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just finished that sentence. And what we've got with Harry is that you've got an upper class, a member of the upper class, who's trying to imitate the lower class to acquire credibility, to get acceptance. So that's where we have a kind of incarnation of different values. Sorry, please, I don't know which order you're in.
Eva?
I just wanted to ask, or rather, well, give my thoughts. I mean, these speeches by the Queen and Harry, it's almost 70 years apart. So, of course, also in German, for example, because I'm German, I take this example. If I compare the speech by Adenauer with the speech by Scholz, there would be so many differences simply because speech evolved over time, or what is acceptable or what not, what Peter also said. Or with Charles de Gaulle and Macron, for example, right? If you compare these two, it's a huge difference the way they talk. So wouldn't it be maybe more ideal or maybe to compare Harry with William to stay in the royal picture? because they are in the same time, and I don't have this huge time gap between Queen Elizabeth in 47 and Harry in 2016. So I think then we could rather have a comparison. How do they play to the audience, or is it still William's more royal role, whatever you would like to call it? I think for me that would make it more relevant, the comparison, maybe, without criticizing. I think the idea as such to analyze this is very good. I just would like to comment that maybe the time gap plays a big role on the outcome, actually.
Would you like me to answer or later?
As you please.
Well, I was just saying, yes, what happens if you compare Harry to William is that you're comparing two individuals. You don't actually see the bigger picture. When you've got 70 years, you've got really the movement, which is a societal movement. And this is inscribed in kind of a larger historical cycle, because you've got the move from, Victorian England through Edwardian England, and you've got between the wars, and then you've got this journey. Where are we going to? Which direction is it going? Where is it pointing to? So one of the reasons why I liked the image of the flight of the starlings, it's because you can focus on a small part and you don't see anything. You just see a lot of birds running around in different directions. If you step back and you see this whole cloud, you get a completely different understanding of what is actually going on. And what are the starlings doing? Why are they moving like that? And, that's been studied, and it's quite interesting. And it's not just a question of survival as far as the starlings are concerned. They are actually communicating. They're actually telling each other, there's some good worms over here, and this is a good place, this is a good branch, third tree from the left, and so on. So we are operating perhaps in a far more complex way than we imagine at different levels, and maybe over a long period of time. That's the idea. 70 years is long for a personal lifetime. The other thing about voice is that nobody, or very few of us, have been recorded throughout our lifetimes. The only people who have are people who have been in the limelight for long enough. And that's a handful of people. But we as individuals have not. I mean, maybe, and so, and this is very interesting because there's a study which is very interesting, which I read about, which I don't know about. I was hoping some of you might know. It's about Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands. And between a certain period of time, apparently her speech pattern has accelerated and has now reverted back to what it was. Now, I don't know what that reflects, but it's definitely a sign of reflection of something that's going on in Dutch society. Similarly, with some other, there's Ruth, I can't remember, so a Chief Justice, Ruth
Bader Ginsburg.
Exactly, Ginsburg. Apparently, her accent also has shifted during her career. She had, from what I understood, she had quite a pronounced New York accent, which then she toned down. And then when she became a chief judge, her initial accent came back. Now, what does that indicate about the society she operates, and also the function she has in that particular society? But anyway, so that's enough. Grazia,
we just got out of time, but I would love to hear from Grazia and Anya, if you don't mind, because they've had their hand up. Grazia, can...
Yes, if we have enough time, because I know we are maybe running out of time, but I would like to make an observation as a non-British person that lived in Great Britain for 10 years or so. And to me, comparing these two videos is very interesting because it does show the evolution of values, yeah. And indeed, we can see that whereas the Queen positions herself really as not only the daughter of the British Empire, but actually the leader of the British Empire. Her grandson doesn't do so at all, of course. And that in fact, the entire way he speaks, he moves and so on, suggests a much more egalitarian relationship to the people he speaks to. In fact, he's not speaking only to the Americans, but he's also speaking to his own people. And the other thing I wanted to say, because you talked about emotion and the relationship to emotions, I read in a very interesting article whose author, I'm sorry, I've forgotten, whose name I've forgotten. The authors were pointing out that since Diana's death, something happened in relation to the British, the general British way of relating oneself to the expression of emotions, and that something happened in British society, and that people, because of the communal grieving that took place when Diana died, people started feeling more free to express their emotions and are becoming a lot more into and turning more and more into more expressive, emotionally expressive people. So I don't know if the British people who are here, or those who have lived in Great Britain, would like to say something about that, but perhaps that could be part of what we could consider.
Great. Thank you. Anya?
Yes, thank you. So just 3 quick remarks. So I think the discussion between the speeches between Elizabeth and now Harry is very interesting, really, at the moment, because I mean the incarnation of Charles is right. I mean, it's really up to date now, and we're really curious to see what Charles now is doing, actually. And well, I always look at it from the point of view of a Toastmasters, actually, and look how they are doing in terms of public speaking. So, and when I watched this speech of Harry now, at the beginning, I thought, well, he could have done better. And his upbringing certainly included public speaking, and well, he was like wandering around the stage. And but then the second thought in our discussion now, I thought, okay, yeah, he probably tuned it kind of down in order to adapt to the situation and to his audience. So that was a nice thing I discovered in between. And then the questions you put in the beginning, what could be vocal trends, and does somebody sound more credible to you? I think these are interesting questions as well. And I discovered that I'm constantly watching out for these hints as well. So I'm living in Milan as a German expat, and my son is going to a German school now. And so there are all kinds of parents who were brought up completely in Italy or arrived at a later stage. And you can always tell when they left Germany, or the vocabulary the teachers are actually using sometimes. It's incredible. And sometimes you think, oh, that's old-fashioned, you wouldn't say so anymore. And on the other hand, the kids who develop their own language. So they're very fascinating trends, I think. And also a generation thing which is going on. And about the being credible thing, I happen to have, I went to a school, and it happens to be that the minister, one of our school speakers of the school nowadays is a minister in Germany. So he's giving speeches on a quite frequent basis. And I discovered that when he opens his mouth, for me, it's always sympathetic, because yeah, he really comes from the village where I came from. So, and you hear this little slight idiomatic things which really make an effect apart from the content. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Florence also had her hand up.
Yeah, actually, I had a more general thought about teaching foreign languages and what values are conveyed when you see the evolution, for instance, in France, how English is taught over the years and what cultural values go through the teaching of English over the years, and was just a general thought around this also from a bigger picture, from a more English pronunciation, Oxford English pronunciation, over to a more American way of speaking. And that was very interesting as I'm more on the teaching side of languages. So, and I'm not sure teachers have this in mind.
It's interesting because there's I just found a book which you may have heard about, which is it's called RP, and hang on, RP. The name will come back. Basically, it's a guide for how to pronounce English today, rather than to go back to the old versions and the old phonetic references and so on. So you don't teach to pronounce English the same way. So it's a new manual, it's just come out.
Yeah, and the link with values, and that's interesting, and what's behind, and how we see the word in this respect. And going back to the birthday speech of Elizabeth, it makes the link, of course.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
We are out of time, but we do have a couple more hands up. I understand if people need to go, but we still had George and Peter, you still have your hands up. Did you have comments that you wanted to make?
Yeah, I would like to, I put a couple of things, I thought we were going to terminate. I put a couple of things into the chat, but fundamentally what I'm looking at here is right now what neuroscience is telling us is that we connect with each other through identity parlance rather than rational parlance, which is to say, if I'm making a decision, I make the decision like, is this me or is this not me? And then the reasons to support it are things which I bring out in the process. Now, I have an intern at the moment who can't get back into the country because her skin's a little too brown. But at any rate, she has written a brilliant study of Donald Trump's effectiveness on his flock, you know, and what it is that he is perfectly what the French sociologist Lyotard said about the cultural mediator, and that's someone who can take an idea or a product and express it in your identity terms in such a way that it seems totally natural and acceptable to you. And one of the things we're seeing all over the place, Amna, who's the intern, and I are leading courses in Austria from this chair, of course, but we're doing things on populism and decolonization. And what we're finding is the strong men around are able to speak to the sense of identity, they're often opposed by people who try to put, well, these are the real facts. The real facts don't count unless they connect to the identity. And what you do with your voice to connect to the identity is critical. That's what I wanted to put in there, and blah, blah, blah. But it's something that's going on. It's revolutionizing how we think of culture, human nature, and decision-making.
This concept of cultural mediator is brilliant.
Yeah, it's you know, we live in a whole mess of what we call meta narratives, socially constructed realities through voice largely. I mean, we hear a voice even when we read something in text. And the voice we put to that is generally the one that relates to how it relates to our identity. And so we're in a situation right now where it's very dangerous, I think, because we are wide open to all kinds of potential dictators.
Yeah.
Peter, you had your hand up. Did you have another comment to make?
Very briefly, the conscious or unconscious choice of communication style is influenced by role and context, by the role that they have and the context in which they speak. And in that respect, the princess's speech and the prince's speech are not comparable. They have different roles. Harry will never be king. He's really glad about that. Yeah, he'll never be king. He'll never have that role that Elizabeth had. And the context is very different. And final point is that unconsciously or unconsciously, Harry was influenced by his audience. Communication accommodation theory tells us that to make yourself, to be able to win over the audience, you have to make yourself attractive to that audience, and consciously or unconsciously, he has adapted his style to that. I'm pretty sure that he didn't talk like that to his grandmother.
Wow. Anya, did you have a final comment? Did you have, your hand is still up, Anya? Okay. Chérif, any closing thoughts for us today?
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I've collected a lot of brilliant ideas and thoughts. My closing thoughts would be really that form, content are really inseparable, and they condition absolutely everything about the message that we have to convey. I mean, for me, it's this idea of the word is not just is. I mean, as you said with Trump and so on, we can see that it's only such a small part of the communication that we've given it, perhaps, especially in the West, too much importance. And listening to how things are said is vital for us to understand and maybe to take back control of where we want to go. So that's really, this question of form and content, this relationship.
Thank you all, and thank you, Chérif, and thank you for this wonderful discussion for today. Happy Labor Day.
Happy May Day, or should I say May Day, May Day.
So our next meeting is June 4th. Victoria, do we have a speaker for June 4th?
No.
But we will.
Definitely.
Thank you all very much, and for this wonderful discussion.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for your comments. I've just taken a snapshot because I haven't had time to read them, but I shall read them afterwards.
Bye.